we read in the portion of Tetzaveh, the mitzvah of the providing the appropriate fuel for the menorah. What was the fuel for the menorah? Which was, the mitzvah was to kindle every day. The menorah was located in the covered sanctuary of the Mishkan, and ultimately in the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, it was the covered sanctuary. It was located in a location where on the southern wall, you had the menorah, this golden candelabra, which had 7 receptacles, which contained oil with a wick in them, and they were kindled. On the left wall, on the northern wall of the covered sanctuary, we have the golden table with the showbread. In the middle, you have the golden altar, which is known as the incense altar, where every day they would sacrifice the incense. It's called Mizbeach Hazov, or Mizbach HaKtoris. The Mizbeach of the incense, they burned incense twice a day. One did not burn incense on the outer altar, which is called Mizbach HaOlah. Only sacrifices of meat sacrifices and meal sacrifices went on the outside altar, which was located in the courtyard. It wasn't a covered area. The menorah itself, as we mentioned many times, represents the oral law. Illumination, elucidation, gives one the ability to see things that without that illumination, you would not see it. All the divine assistance that gives us the ability to fully understand and grasp and come upon truth is only due to the kindling of that menorah. And therefore, the oil, which is olive oil, has to be the purest of pure. Because the only way one merits to come upon the truth of Torah, one has to have within himself that level of purity. That level of esteeming it and revering it and valuing it, that it's the ultimate. The Torah itself, coming upon its truth, is really a gift of God. And you're only worthy of that gift, of that endowment, if you sufficiently value it. If you understand what its essence is, that it's the ultimate. You know, it's interesting. You read about somebody down in the Keys in Florida. They're treasure seekers. They want to bring up a galleon from a Spanish ship that sunk in these, whatever it is, the 1600s, 1500s, off Cape, whatever it is, in the Keys. And they're spending fortunes to raise the ship because the amount of bullion, gold and silver on that ship is enormous. And there's no amount of money they're not going to spend to bring it up. And there's even a question of risking one's life. Of course, there could be accidents when you bring it up and you have to go down, scuba divers. But you know something? Because if you really appreciate the value of those treasures, it's worth every effort in the world. And when people hear about it, they say, you know something? That makes sense. It's worth every effort in the world, every amount of money, because if you strike it rich, you bring that up, not only you'll be worth a fortune. Literally, casks filled with gold and silver, coins and gems and everything else. It's a find of a century, of a millennia. People get it. And God, He creates a world with an objective to come upon the truth of His Torah and to live by His Torah. And people dedicate their lives to try to understand it and internalize the truths of that narrative. People say, you're an archaic person. You're a provincial Jew. You're a backward Jew. Don't you realize we're out of the Dark Ages? We're no longer in the Dark Ages. You understand? Bringing up the silver and gold, the galleon, risking your life, that's something to be impressed with. That's something to be admired. The man saved every penny in his life to be able to buy the Mona Lisa at the age of 85. At the age of 85, he invited all the homeless people to celebrate his acquisition of the Mona Lisa. This man will be written up in Guinness World Book of Records, one of a lifetime accomplishment. Such a level of dedication, single focusedness, being focused, not to be distracted, but a person who's immersed in studying Torah, not distracted, single focused. This man missed the boat. All the pleasures of life. You mean you could have gone on the Titanic and you turned down the opportunity? I guess that wasn't such an opportunity. As they say, hindsight is 20/20. People who envied those who went on it, they sang God's praises that they weren't on the Titanic. Although they felt ashamed because they were within that wealth class and they couldn't get on the Titanic, so they were labeled as, you guys aren't the lucky guys. But only later that people realized who was truly lucky, the one who did not get on that boat. Many years ago, Rabbi Beryl Wine, he had a Jewish history tape series. And you would buy it in the Yad Avram. Many years we had it in our library, and you were able to borrow the tapes. You pop it into a tape recorder, into your tape deck in the car. So he spoke about the Jews in Havana, Cuba, that, during the war, many Jews fled to Cuba, and they were able to get into Cuba. That was a safe haven. And when the state of Israel was founded in 1948, the Jews there, many of them were of a wealthy class. Many of them. Europeans, Sephardic Jews. It was a mixed community. And if you remember, many of you were old enough to remember when Castro overthrew the Batista government, what they did was they confiscated all the personal assets of all the people, the factories, even and they allowed people to leave with their shirts on their backs at that time. And many Jews left Havana and they came to the United States. And anything, they only allowed you to take a minimum amount of money, enough really just to leave the country, nothing more than that. And many of the Jews, because they were very Zionistic, they had purchased Israeli bonds, large numbers of bonds. So Castro, when they went and checked through their personal belongings, they see Jews bringing out satchels of Israeli bonds. Israeli bonds, what are they worth? Worth nothing. Bunch of paper with whatever it is on it. They let the Jews take those bonds. Those Israeli bonds they took out of the country and came to Florida. And that was that working capital. That was the seed capital to get started over again. But then the communistic government of Castro and his brother Raul and the whole group there, they said, it's a banana republic, Israel. That's all they are. What's it worth? You used to wrap pears in that kind of paper. That's about all it's worth. But only later did they realize what they took out gave them the ability to start their lives over with working capital. People, dedicate your life to Judaism, to Torah. You're a backward provincial Jew. You never saw the light of day. You could be something, you could invest that genius you have in something else. Why are you being such a backward person? After 120 years, in retrospect, they'll understand the value of that. That was the ultimate prize, and they all missed the boat. So God only endows the gift to that person if you are dedicated and you esteem it and revere it, and you're willing to sacrifice for it. That is a confirmation that it's the most special level of value in your life. God says, because you vowed such a degree, you're a proper caretaker, therefore you're worthy to be the repository of this special knowledge. And you live by it. That's your credo. Every child, based on the Talmud, 2 locations, it stated that when a child begins speaking, the first words you teach him are Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha kilas Yaakov. The Torah was commanded us by Moshe, Morosh. It's the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Those are the first words you teach a child. The child has no understanding what those words mean, but the child's just beginning to speak. And the second verse you teach him is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What is the credo of every Jew? A little kid, the world. Mary had a little lamb. That's what you teach a kid, a new child. The kid is so precocious. He says those words so perfectly. He doesn't even need a speech therapist to get the words out of his mouth. The parents are very proud. But the first thing you teach a Jewish child is, what's the credo? That's the credo of the Jew. That's our perspective. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, or Shekilah. That's where it all began. That's its origin. Moshe is the word of God. Because the Jewish people at Sinai, 4 million Jews, witnessed openly, through open prophecy, how God communicated with Moshe, designating him as a spokesman. But you all know, people have short memories. Even in Egypt, Moshe proved himself that he's the Redeemer. He performed miracles. And he came and shared with them the 4 expressions of redemption, which we commemorate with the 4 cups of wine at the Seder, to correspond to them. But his words fell on deaf ears. Why? They did not have the capacity to internalize those words because they were short-winded and they were overwhelmed with heavy work. Therefore, they said, Moshe, we understand what you're saying, but we have to meet quotas. We got to put food on our tables. We understand we shouldn't go to work on Shabbos. But if every week we're sent from pillar to post, from one position to another, if we don't show up on Saturday, they tell us not to come back, and you have to feed your family. Although we send our children for public education and it doesn't cost us tuition, which is basically the death wish of those generations, and those generations were lost because there was no Jewish education, but people weren't able to meet the challenge. It was too painful. But God says, I will provide. And it's a known fact. The Jews who sacrificed and did not violate the Shabbos, and they kept, although they were simple Jews, they weren't Torah scholars. They weren't that learned, but they knew one thing. We don't work on the Shabbos. We eat kosher. That's all they knew. They didn't know much more than that. And we pray every day, and we wear tefillin every day. They didn't know much more than that. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren of all those Jews today are observant Jews. Not only are they observant, they're actually committed to Torah. Many of them have established Torah institutions, disseminators of Torah, leading graduate schools, Talmudic scholars, authors of Torah works, or even financially involved, but philanthropists supporting Torah causes, Jewish causes. They are the descendants of those original. Levi Strauss, San Francisco, wealthy. What do you think? Where are the descendants? They went to the dustbins of history. Assimilated, reform. And many Reform Jews, 50% minimally, are not even Jewish because the maternal side is not Jewish. The Rothschild family, maybe there's one Jewish Rothschild. Majority of them are not Jewish. Although there's a Rothschild Foundation and they support many things, but because the mothers, the maternal side's not Jewish, they're not Jewish. You know, there's an expression, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the way it works. You know, you get caught up and you believe, God, you're not coming through for us. But what's the illumination? What gives the Jew the capacity to appreciate and understand what it's all about? When a person goes to the battlefield, even if he comes from a wealthy family, when he goes through basic training, he has to learn survival techniques. Because when he's on that battlefield, he's not being served any special 5-course meals. His clothing are battle fatigue. His boots are not supple leather imported from Italy or Switzerland. None of that. Why? And he has a helmet covering that head, because if there's ever shrapnel or debris falling, his head has to be protected. You know, you have a person, Reformed Jew, goes bareheaded, and he's putting up one of these skyscrapers. He's underwriting it. So he wants to visit, you know, the construction of the city. He said, hard hat area. Insurance company does not allow you to go into that area unless you're wearing a hard hat. This man never wore his head covered. All of a sudden, he's wearing a hard hat. He said, Mr. Schwartz, I thought you don't cover your head. Well, you realize I have no choice because something may hit me on the head, and I want to live. So he understands there he has to cover his head. When you're in the battlefield, you have to wear that helmet. You have to have battle gear. Rabbi Luzzatto tells us that life is a forefront battle. Every direction we turn, we're confronted with a challenge, with a temptation, with an ego issue. What do I do? When you go to battle, you got to wear battle fatigue, and the strategies are battle strategies. And you have to have the munitions. And you have to have sufficient munition. Otherwise, you don't survive the battle. You don't come back from battle. You want to come back a decorated soldier, not an amputee. Well, they'll put an artificial limb on you. You'll become a mechanical man. All your joints are reconstructed. You want to come back a whole person. God puts us on the face of this earth. He gives us all the needs, all the components, all the apparatus, all the fatigues that are needed to go into battle. You know what those fatigues are called and what the munitions are called? It's called Torah mitzvos. You do the Torah, you study it, you observe the positive and negative commandments. God says, I will create a shield, I will shield you. There'll be an impregnable shield surrounding you. And you'll come back whole. You may not come back alive, but you'll come back to your origin whole. Because when you will return your soul to your maker, that soul's going to be whole, not mutilated, not soiled. It'll come back in a pristine condition, even a more advanced condition. But how does one achieve that level of clarity? You should take for yourself olive oil, the purest, which is crushed specifically for illumination. It's not for the meal offerings, it's for illumination. And the Medrash says something interesting. If a person has cold pressed olive oil, or whatever the best quality, and you have a choice to use it for kindling or for eating, what's its primary usage? For eating, for consumption. Use a second-rate oil for kindling, for illumination. But yet, in the Mishkan, the ultimate quality oil was for illumination. The second quality oil, not the first droplet, that was added to the meal offerings, which is consumption. Why? The Reb Chaim Volozhiner explains in his work, Nefesh HaChaim, he explains it with an allegory. You live in a time of starvation. The land is not giving forth its bounty. And you have a handful of wheat kernels, and you have a choice. You can eat the wheat kernels, and you'll be satisfied for a certain period of time, or you could put the wheat kernels in the ground and plant with those kernels, and you're going to be hungry. You'll survive, but you're going to be in a state of hunger for an extended period of time. So a person who really doesn't understand, he says, it doesn't make sense. You put that handful of kernels in the ground, what happens? They rot, they decompose, just wasting it. If you eat it, at least you're nourished for a certain period of time. But the man not understanding the process of planting, ultimately that handful of kernels will produce 20 bushels of wheat, or maybe more than that. Every mitzvah we do, based on a verse, it says, it's determined based on how you plant it. You plant it with chesed, with selfless dedication. What's the yield of that action? The yield is much greater. Everything's based on how you plant it. What we plant, it's minuscule. But the yield that grows from that is bounty. What's the degree of that bounty? It's based on what you put in that ground. It's what you invested your life. That would be the determinator. But how does one have that appreciation? You know, Cornell has a school of agriculture. You got to go up to Utica, New York, or Syracuse. I think it's Utica, Cornell University, School of Agriculture. You went to Cornell, you have an appreciation how to be a farmer, how to maximize on every acre. Bioengineering, how out of an acre, one time you could only get 10 bushels, now you get 1,000 bushels out of an acre. Because they're experts at bioengineering and they know exactly what type of seed to put in that kind of soil and how to enrich that soil. But if you didn't go there, do you know how to plant, now to be a farmer? Well, I read the Farmer's Almanac. Yeah, well, Farmer's Almanac doesn't tell you how to be a farmer. You know, you're basically ignoramus. It's like people think they're expert in Judaism. And you say, by the way, how much time have you spent in investing in Judaism? Well, you know, I dabbled in it. I once heard a lecture. Somebody had come from Hebrew Union College from Cincinnati, and he gave a lecture. And he spoke about King David the dancer and how he played the harp. And he was off tune because they'd have Juilliard School of Music to teach him how to play the harp. You got it? You understand? But he's the expert in Judaism. He knows what it's all about. Because you know why? Because he has a PhD from Harvard in law. So he's the expert in knowing exactly what God's all about. Because he has a superior intelligence. Go ask him how to do open heart surgery. I was like, that's not my area. But you're supposed to be such a genius. You're supposed to know everything. Well, I only know my field, and this is your field. And yet you keep me busy for 3 hours telling me your philosophy about what Judaism is about and what God is all about. You have to study the text. You have to study the narrative. You have to merit many things to come upon its understanding. A person could describe hieroglyphics, but if you can't read hieroglyphics, you don't even know what's going on. You can read the words. I took Ulpan. I spent 3 months on a kibbutz, and I used to clean out the chicken coops. And I spoke Hebrew to the Scandinavians that also worked on the kibbutz. They weren't even Jewish. And when I read the Bible, I can even understand the words, what they mean. When it says ata, it means you. And when it says lo with an aleph, means no. Oh, you're an expert in the Bible because you can read the Bible. You understand how absurd this is? Take the oil, the purest, the first droplet, which is crushed for illumination. It's the purest of pure. And this has to do with God's intervention, divine intervention, giving you an appreciation for the truth of Torah. But of course, you have to apply yourself. You have to dedicate yourself. You have to meet all the prerequisites to come upon its truth. You don't become a Torah sage through osmosis. Your father could have been the greatest Torah sage in the world. If you don't study, you know nothing. Material is passed on through inheritance. Heritage means you have a right to it. You have a right to partake of it, but you have to invest your life in it to understand and you should own it. But if you don't invest your life, you don't own it. And you have no idea what it is. Person has a chocolate cake. It could have been baked by the greatest culinary chef or pastry chef. Unless you taste it, you don't know what it tastes like. A blind person who never saw light, he was blind from birth. You can describe it from forever, what light is. He doesn't even relate to what light is. Unless you study the Torah at a minimal level, you have no inkling what it's about. Well, I know Judaism is based on that. Bertram Russell once said something about Judaism. Okay. Therefore what? So let's understand something. There's a midrash. The midrash says, Omer Abeir, Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chovav Lai Nerush Aaron Madlik. The candles which Aaron, who's the high priest, what he kindles, are beloved to me. Mina Menorah shekavati b'shemaim. It's more beloved to me than the luminaries that I put into heaven. I mean, more than the sun, more than the moon, more than all the stars and all the galaxies. Lama, why? Why is it more beloved to me, more special to me? Shebishosh ekrivu anasim chanukas hamizbeach lo hikriv shevet Levi. When the princes inaugurated and coronated the Mishkan, when it was established, and each one brought his gift over a 12-day period, and the tribe of Levi was left out, was not included in this order of inauguration. They did not participate. Aaron nafsha aguma. Aaron was personally in the doldrums. He felt offended to the nth degree. He felt denied. Why is he left out? It wasn't an ego issue. He felt we're left out because we're not worthy. Here, what he hoped to ultimately participate, all of a sudden he sees he didn't make the grade. So he's paying that he doesn't have the opportunity to participate in this sanctification of God's name. He's pained. Omar, all the princes brought gifts and sacrifices to commemorate and coordinate and celebrate the inauguration of the altar. And I had no share in those sacrifices. God says to Aaron, I swear on your life. When they inaugurated the Mishkan, it's a one-time affair. But you're going to have your own inauguration. You can be at a level which they don't participate in. Outside of the curtain that separates in the communion tent, Aaron and his children will arrange it. There's a verse in Tehillim. God says, I heard the desire of the humble. And because I heard his pain and why he felt deprived, therefore I responded. Therefore, you must get involved and make sure it's at the ultimate level, and Aaron and his children should be the ones to kindle the menorah. But I want to bring out something else. I want you to tell the Jewish people, Bonai, my children, in this world, you were required to have the light of the base of the temple, and you lit candles, lights within it. But in the world to come, in the merit of kindling those lights, in the merit of kindles, I will bring you Melech Mashiach, the anointed king, Shu Moshel Kaner, and he's the equivalent of the illuminator. Shenemar Shom, Atzmiach Keren LeDavid, I will cause to develop the radiance of David, Arachti Ner LeBeshichig. I've arranged a light for the anointed one. He will be the illuminator, because you lit the lights in the temple, and that merit, you will merit the ultimate light, the coming of Mashiach. He will illuminate the world. What's the measure for measure? So the way I understand it is this. Moshe is Torah. Moshe is the conduit for knowing, for having what we have. Torah Tzivilon Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov. But you may have the Torah, but if you don't have the key to open it, to merit, and you don't have the codes to understand it, to be able to fully grasp it and embrace it, you kept at arm's length. How do you penetrate it? You need something to activate something which creates illumination. What provides you with that illumination that you should be meritorious, that God should provide you with that understanding, with the elucidation? It's the kindling of the menorah. When Aaron kindles that menorah, which represents the illumination, the elucidation of the written law, then it becomes available to you. Then you could live as that proper Jew. You could function at that advanced level. Then creation, existence meets its objective. If you meet that objective, then you merit the coming of Mashiach. So the lights in the temple, if they're done right and correctly, and you meet all the prerequisites of what that's all about, the Jews will be able to achieve a level of understanding and observance, qualitative observance, and knowledge due to that lighting. As a result of that, you will merit the coming of Mashiach, which is the ultimate light. He will shed light on all existence, because when he comes, all evil will be purged, and mankind will have absolute understanding of what truth is. That's the measure for measure. Understanding what the value of this oil is. The Chofetz Chaim explains something with phenomenal allegory. The Navi says, Im lo brisi yom v'lo lo. If not for my covenant, which is in place day and night, chukos shamayim v'aretz lo samti. All the orders and the protocols of existence, heaven and earth, will not exist. Meaning it's only because Torah is continuously studied, the world is able to stand. It's only in the merit of Torah, the world continues. But if there'd be a moment that there's an absence of Torah, where nobody in the world is studying Torah, the world will revert back to pre-existence. It's based on a Zohar. Rav Chaim Voloshin also mentions it in his work. So the Chofetz Chaim says, what is it analogous to? There was this very great king. There's nothing he couldn't afford. And he goes and he tells his courtiers, and they just came out with the paddle boat, the steamboat. And he tells them he wants them to build a palace, a replica of his palace, identical, on this steamboat. And when he walks in there, he wants to feel like he's in his own palace. Of course, a miniature of the palace, but everything, all the amenities are there. Gets on the boat. The captain of the boat, of the steamboat, is dressed impeccable uniform, fit to meet a king. Starched uniform with the gold buttons, with the hat, with all the insignias. And, he takes the king and his family for a ride across the water, just glides over, doesn't feel a bump. And the king is just amazed of this new acquisition he has, a palace which glides over the water and at a speed which normally the wind doesn't carry it at that speed and control. So he says to the captain, could you tell me, how is this boat fueled? So he starts explaining to him. In the bowels of the boat, there are furnaces, and the men who shovel coal into the furnaces, and this causes steam and the turbines, and this causes the paddles to move, and that's how we glide over the water. So the king says, I would like to see it for myself. See it with my own eyes. So the king says, so the captain says, it's not appropriate. In the bowels of the ship, we have all the coal and the coal dust and the heat. It's not appropriate for the king even to expose himself to that level of uncleanliness. He says, I want to see it. He goes down to the bows of the ship and he sees men literally stripped to the waist because the heat is so intense, and they're shoveling coal into these furnaces, which create the steam to move the turbines, which cause the paddles to move. And because of the coal, there's so much coal dust embedded on the walls, on the floor, on the ceiling. And the people work there, they're white, they're not black, but the coal dust is so embedded in the crevices of their skin, they look like black men. The king sees this, he becomes infuriated. And he says to the king, this is a disgrace. I will not tolerate such uncleanliness, such squalor in my palace. He says, I want immediately to take these walls, break them out. So the captain pleads with the king. He says, we break out the walls, what happens? The ship goes down. He says, it doesn't make a difference. In a state of rage, he spoke totally irrationally. He says, I cannot tolerate it. Take it out. He says, but you don't realize this coal, with all this coal dust, that's what keeps the ship afloat. Doesn't make a difference. Take it out. I will not tolerate it. They take out the walls, the ship sinks, it's over. You go into a study hall and you see Talmidei Chachamim, true Torah scholars, dedicated, studying 18 hours a day. They're not into the high-end menu. They don't wear the Gucci shoes and the Brioni suits and tailor-made and custom-made shirts with their initial on the sleeve, with the jewelry and the cologne and the silk handkerchief in their pocket. Hermes, right? You know, they don't even know what, they never heard of the word. And somebody walks in, he says, these people, are they even worth looking at? What's their value? They can't even put a decent meal on the tables because they're busy studying this archaic, ancient work called the Talmud. You know something? I think we should do whatever we can to just shut down this type of operation. Chofetz Chaim says, you shut down this operation, it's even worse than breaking out the walls of that boat. Because these people, the world stands on their shoulders. If not for their studies and their dedication and the energies they generate through that Torah, with its purity, you people don't have blessing. And not only wouldn't you have blessing, you may even have your existence. They afford protection due to their merit, what they generate. Famous story with the Chofetz Chaim. There was a hospital they had built not too far from Radin, which was the Chofetz Chaim's community. And they invited the Chofetz Chaim to be the guest speaker. So when they had this banquet, they invited all the benefactors of the hospital, the ones who donated the building, the rooms, the windows, the medical equipment. And they also invited all the Torah scholars to come. They were part of the community. And the Chofetz Chaim begins speaking, and the Chofetz Chaim was revered by everyone. And even these benefactors understood who the Chofetz Chaim was. He was a holy man. And the first thing he begins praises the Torah scholars. Here these people gave their hard-earned money to be benefactors, to build the building, the equipment, the windows, everything, the doors, to be a first-rate hospital. And who does he talk about first? About the Torah scholars. And then finally, he comes to them at the end, postscript, benefactor, Schwartz, Cohen, and Strauss. Right? There's no Rockefeller there. And no Andrew Carnegie. He's not there either. No, he's not there. Or Astor. These people are not mentioned. Okay? So they came over to Chofetz Chaim afterwards. They asked, Holy Rabbi, could you explain to us? Here we give the money to build the hospital, the equipment, everything. Don't you think you should have mentioned us first? Because if not for us, there wouldn't be a hospital. So Chofetz Chaim said, I want to explain it to you. The Torah scholars, because of their studies, they protect people from coming ill. They'd have to come into the hospital. But those who don't merit that level of protection, unfortunately, they have to come into the hospital. So you provided that. But is it preventive medicine better than medicine? These people prevent it from happening. You people came in the lurch because we have no choice, because these people are succumbing to whatever those illnesses may be. Therefore, who should I acknowledge first? The Torah scholars or you people? They understood it. They heard what he said, but you have to understand and appreciate it. What's true value? So when it says in Pirkei Avos, Aseh Torah Keva, Malach Charai, your Torah should be primary and your work should be secondary. It doesn't make sense. We live in the real world. You're not in touch with the real world. Moshe Reichman, who was the wealthiest Jew at one point in the world, he understood what the real world was. He was a major Talmud Chacham. He was a special Jew. He revered Torah like nobody revered Torah. There's a book that came out on him. You're amazed the amounts of money that he gave to support Torah. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Only because he esteemed it and revered it to a degree, and he understood its importance, how vital it was for the existence of the Jewish people and the existence of the world. The oil has to be pure. You have to crush it. You have to sacrifice for it. to come upon its truths. You can't have the cake and eat it. I'll eat that sandwich, a club, pastrami, whatever else it is, and the fat runs from your mouth, and out of that same mouth, Torah words, holy words should flow. No, you have your head in the feed bag. You don't see what it says in the Talmud. We eat to live, we don't live to eat. No, that was an old expression. Do you eat to live or do you live to eat? New restaurant opens. You got to go there. There was a write-up, and it has a certification that it's kosher. It's unheard of. Chop suey, kosher chop suey, whatever they eat today. You understand? What are you getting excited about? Is that what life's all about? To eat kosher chop suey? Or they have fake crab cakes, imitation crab cakes. They taste like crab cakes, but it's kosher. Of course, they use cod. They don't use crabs or lobster. You guys getting all excited. You understand how off people are. But Rabbi, you don't understand it. You don't appreciate what life's all about. Okay. You believe what you believe, and I'll believe what I believe. You must take that oil, the first droplet extracted, which is the purest of pure. And only that generates illumination, which is elucidation. And that's the person who truly gets it. And the other person actually, unfortunately, misses the boat.